More and more parents are being prosecuted for lying about their address in order to send their children to better schools. Now, the way that public education works is oftentimes if you're living in a poorer working class neighborhood, the public schools in that area are not likely to be well funded. So as a result, parents throughout the country are either lying about their address or creating fraudulent documents to make it seem as though they live in a wealthier area so they can send their children to wealthier schools, or better funded schools, I should say. So people are starting to catch on to this, and the law is coming after them much more aggressively. Let me give you an example. Some have been heavily fined for lying about where they live on official district documents. Others have been criminally charged and in some cases jailed. So let me give you some examples. In 2011, Tanya McDowell, a homeless mother in Bridgeport, Connecticut, by the way, a homeless mother, she doesn't have a home, so what is she going to do? Was arrested for sending her 5-year-old son to a Norwalk school. And in 2009, Yolanda Hill, a Rochester, New York mother, was charged with 2 felonies after enrolling her children in a nearby suburban district. So as you guys can see, it's going further than fines. At this point, they're prosecuting these people as if they're criminals that should be behind bars. All they want is a better education for their children.
There's a line here from the Montgomery County District Attorney, a woman named Risa Vetri Furman, who says, and this is the case in this story is by a guy named Hamlet Garcia in Norristown, Pennsylvania. He and his wife, they say they were during a marital separation, and they were living then with the wife and daughter lived with the wife's father in Lower Moreland, a quaint suburban township of Rolling Hills outside Philadelphia.
The couple had separated.
Right, and the kid there, outrageous things happened when the kid went there. They went to the elementary school and she read picture books, she learned the alphabet and made friends. I mean, you want to put a stop to that as soon as possible.
How dare she?
I mean, it's one thing to learn the alphabet, but to learn the alphabet and make friends, it's the kind of thing we can't stand for in America.
We can't have it in America, no.
So here's the quote from Assistant Montgomery County District Attorney Risa Vetri Furman, and I would just say to her, this is why you went to law school? This is why you went through this process to become the district attorney? They, quote, essentially stole from every hardworking taxpayer who resides within the Lower Moreland School District. You can't possibly have gotten into this line of work to say something like that.
Yeah.
They're not stealing. It's not stealing. It isn't. They're calling it theft of services. They're calling it. This is a kid who, because they're maintaining that it was all a ruse and that they were never really separated. I mean, and if it turns out that it's true and that it was a ruse and they weren't really separated, you want to put this child's parents, in addition to sending them back to the crappy Philadelphia public schools that they were maybe trying to escape, if this is true, you then want to make it worse and put her father in jail for up to 8 years or 7 years? 7 years behind bars. She's 8, the daughter, Fiorella.
Yeah, they face 7 years behind bars because they wanted a better education for their kid. And the thing is, we've done stories about specific people who have gone through similar things. I mean, if you are a homeless woman who has a 5-year-old son or a 5-year-old child, what do? You don't have a home. So does that mean that your kid doesn't have a right to a public education in this country? That's absurd. And by the way, this is a perfect example of how this country lacks empathy, because at one point, we were empathetic. At one point, we realized, okay, this is happening because there is a flaw in the system. Now, it varies based on which state you live in or which municipality you live in. But in some school districts, the local schools are funded by property taxes, right? So if you're living in a rich area, then of course the school is going to be well funded. If you're living in a poor area where the property taxes or the property value is much lower, well, then you're not going to have a well-funded school. So there is an inequality of education, and instead of trying to deal with that broken system, we're trying to put a Band-Aid on it, or we're trying to criminalize people that are just trying to do better for their kids. It's disgusting.
Right, and the solution, of course, is not to take money from rich schools and make them less good.
Exactly.
The solution is to give money to all the schools to meet the standard of the best schools. I was an education reporter in Charleston, South Carolina for 2 or 3 years. It was actually an exciting beat. It sounds dull, but it wasn't. That's where crazy stuff happened, like proposals for White History Month in March to follow Black History Month, and, and trying to ban good textbooks and fill them with nonsensical stuff about the war for Southern and the war of Northern aggression instead of calling it the Civil War. So there were fun stuff there, but mostly what I did was go to, various stories of, fights at school or, whatever, just dumb stories that we could sell and overhype. And I've told this story here before, but I would go to an elementary school or a middle school, I guess it was. I can't remember, in North Charleston. And that's where Walter Scott was killed. He was killed in North Charleston. Oddly enough, just north of Charleston, but essentially a suburb of Charleston, another city right next to Charleston. And the middle school there that I went to all the time was horrendous. I mean, it was just depressing. The principal was great, like a real, busting her ass and trying to inspire teachers and doing everything she could and refusing to leave because, she didn't want to take another job. She wanted this job to work. But, it wasn't lit.
Yeah.
You'd walk down the hallways and the bulbs were out and it's depressing and it's dirty and and then you'd go 6 miles away to this really nice part of town and you'd go to a middle school there and it was like a science fair, and it was just bright and beautiful and fantastic, all in the same school district. And no sane person could make an argument that there were the same opportunities for those kids in the lousy school as there were for those kids in the other school at their most formative age, at 11, 12, 13, 14.
Yeah, education is supposed to create a level playing field for everyone. So regardless of what your socioeconomic status is, you have an opportunity to work yourself up that economic ladder. But if you start out in the very beginning with this huge inequality, then how are you going to expect people who were born into poverty to get themselves out of it? Which is why arguments like picking yourself up by the bootstraps is so ridiculous, because you don't have a level playing field for everyone. And to punish parents who want the best for their kids is ridiculous. It's almost as if you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. If you're a parent who fights to give something meaningful to your kids, apparently the law is going to come after you and criminalize you for it.
By the way, somebody quoted in the story the CEO of Stand for Children, a national education advocacy group, said his group does not condone parents breaking the law, but, quote, the real crime, which needs to be prosecuted, is the glaring inequality in the quality of schools in rich areas versus poor ones, what we've been talking about. I played softball every Sunday with Jonah Edelman.
You did?
In Washington, D.C.
What a nice guy.
Smart guy.
I like him.
Doing good things.
So just one final graphic that I want to read to you guys because it just shows you how severe the punishments can be. Parents in Michigan can be jailed up to 20 days if they do this. In Washington, D.C., you can get up to 90 days. In Oklahoma, you can be jailed for a year if you have the audacity to lie about your address to send your kids to a better
If you have the audacity to do
school.
what every parent is told is the noble thing to do, which is try and get the best circumstance there is for your kid.
And also, one other thing, a lot of schools are funded based on how well students perform on standardized testing. So standardized testing is standardized, meaning that it's the same for everyone regardless of where you live in and what your background is, right? So kids who are from a poor area already have a disadvantage. So they're going to do worse on standardized tests, and the school is going to be underfunded as a result of that. It drives me crazy. I mean, our public education system is just fundamentally broken in so many ways, and it's because of the policies that we're passing.